There are numerous unsettling tales circulating about the immense power wielded by an unrestrained internet mob. However, within that very power of the internet resides the potential for remarkable benevolence. Countless cases that would have otherwise remained unresolved have been successfully addressed thanks to the collective efforts of ordinary individuals on the internet, providing a much-needed lifeline to law enforcement. Here are a few captivating instances wherein the internet played a pivotal role in solving these mysteries. Linda Ann O'Keefe. Linda Ann O'Keefe was a shy little girl and a Girl Scout from Newport Beach, California. She had a passion for painting, crafts, and playing the piano. Her mother often marveled at her incredible talent for expressing herself through drawing. Linda was a diligent girl, always tending to her chores and keeping her room immaculate. She even sought her mother's approval after cleaning every corner. She had 2 sisters and shared a special bond with the eldest, who worked at a dry cleaning shop while still living with their parents. On July 6, 1973, Linda woke up for summer school. Donning a beautiful dress adorned with delicate light blue flowers and dark blue trim, she tied her hair in a ponytail and slipped on white ankle socks and dark blue shoes. She then headed for the door to wait for her piano instructor, who was supposed to pick her up. This seemingly ordinary day would mark the beginning of a horrifyingly tragic tale. Linda went to school at Lincoln Elementary in Corona del Mar. She usually rode there on her bike. On that day, however, her piano teacher offered her a ride to school, which meant she would have to walk on her way back. After her final class was dismissed, Linda wanted to call her mother for a ride home. However, the school's secretary refused to let her use the phone and instructed her to wait. Instead, Linda ventured off to buy some gum at a place called Richard's Market, where she met Brenda, one of her close friends. They chatted a bit, and when it finally came time for them to part ways, something odd happened. According to Brenda, a turquoise van came out of nowhere and was about to hit her. Luckily, she narrowly escaped the collision by quickly leaping aside. Moments later, the van came to a halt near Linda. From a distance, Brenda couldn't discern whether or not Linda was talking to the driver. After that, Linda returned to school and finally managed to convince the secretary to let her use the phone. She called her mother to ask for a ride. Unfortunately, her mom was entangled in work at her job and instructed Linda to trek back home on foot. But when her mom finally returned home, she immediately realized Linda hadn't returned home yet. It was getting late, so the mom tried contacting some of Linda's close friends for information. When Linda's dad returned from work, they both went into separate cars and began looking for their daughter. Their efforts would ultimately prove fruitless. At 6:42 p.m., the police were alerted. Aided by helicopters, a search unit was mobilized, extending the search to the woods and fields surrounding Linda's home. Meanwhile, the family tirelessly reached out to all of Linda's friends, hoping for any leads. While searching for Linda, officers interviewed a young girl named Janine. Janine and her mother were passing by when they spotted Linda seated on a corner near the intersection, with a turquoise van parked beside her. Janine's mother vividly remembered a gnawing intuition that something was wrong. Swiftly, she parked her car nearby, determined to note down the license plate of the dubious van. But before she could grasp her pencil, the van's engine erupted with a deafening roar as it vanished into the distance, with Linda disappearing alongside it. A woman residing on a cliff in Newport Beach was another witness who was questioned. She reported hearing a loud scream nearby, but since she was unaware of the fact that a little girl was missing, she didn't pay much attention to it at the time. The police looked everywhere for Linda, their quest stretching throughout the night. After a brief pause, they resumed their efforts at 7:30 a.m., joined by volunteers who eagerly aided in the search. While all this was happening, a man and his 4-year-old son were out on a frog hunting expedition near a lake just a mile away from Linda's house. As they looked around, the man's eyes widened in shock. There, hidden amidst the cattails, lay a little girl's motionless body. At first, he thought she was sleeping. He tried calling out to her. No response. His hand trembled as he came closer and shook her gently, only to be met with a pair of lifeless eyes. Panic-stricken, the man immediately called 911. That young girl was Linda. Afterward, the Newport Police Department chased numerous leads, only to reach dead ends on every one of them. More than 40 years later, Linda's tragic case was almost completely forgotten, until a tenacious team of investigators stepped forward, driven by the desire to give voice to her tale and provide solace to her grieving family. On July 7, 2018, exactly 45 years after Linda's tragic death, the Newport Police Department revealed they were planning to use state-of-the-art DNA technology to help catch Linda's killer and bring them to justice. The police sought the help of scientists, employing a controversial forensics technique called DNA phenotyping. This method uses DNA and genealogy to create a lifelike age-progressed profile of a perpetrator's physical appearance. Through this process, they were able to generate a profile of Linda's assailant, using DNA samples found on her body. Now, all investigators had to do was find someone who might recognize the murderer from this profile, and luckily, they knew exactly who to turn to for help. They chose the internet, specifically Twitter, as a broadcasting medium. Through a series of tweets, they revealed all the details of Linda's case, including a composite sketch of the perpetrator. Furthermore, they had Linda act as the narrator of her own harrowing story, recounting the timeline of the day she was tragically killed. The social media campaign went viral, attracting widespread attention. Soon enough, numerous tips and leads about the murderer's identity and location came flooding in from all corners of the country. In the end, it all led to the capture of James Allen Neal, a 73-year-old man from Monument, Colorado. He was apprehended in February 2019 and was subsequently extradited to Orange County, California. Neal was put on trial and pleaded not guilty to Linda's murder. He was also accused of being involved in various indecent and morally reprehensible acts, most of which were perpetrated against underage girls between 1995 and 2004. Finally, justice seemed within reach for the O'Keefe family, but their hope for closure was abruptly shattered. On May 25, 2020, Neal was rushed to a local hospital due to an undisclosed illness. He passed away only a few days later. There was some speculation Neal might have succumbed to COVID-19, but the Orange County Sheriff stated that Neal showed no signs of the disease. Despite Linda's killer evading trial, the fact still remains that police investigators, thanks to an unconventional method, managed to capture a murderer who would have otherwise remained at large, all thanks to the power of the internet. At the very least, Linda's family can find solace in the fact that their daughter's case helped shine light on the effectiveness of an otherwise unheard-of investigative method. Tammy Jo Alexander. On November 10, 1979, a teenage girl's body was found in a field in Caledonia, New York. It was near the Genesee River, about 37 kilometers, 23 miles, from Rochester, off U.S. Route 20. Initially, a farmer spotted her from afar and mistook her for a trespassing hunter. But upon closer inspection, he realized the girl was actually dead and promptly contacted the police. It's worth noting that the girl was fully dressed and there was no sign of assault. She'd been struck by 2 bullets. Investigators surmised that the victim had shown no signs of flinching or resistance during the attack, suggesting she wasn't expecting to get shot at the moment leading up to her death. The victim's pockets were emptied, and she had no identification or wallet with her. She was nicknamed the Caledonia Jane Doe, or Callie Doe for short. She was estimated to be between 13 and 19 years old, which meant that she was born somewhere between 1958 and 1967. She was 5 foot 3 inches and weighed 120 pounds. She had brown eyes and light brown shoulder-length hair. Identifying the victim proved particularly challenging due to heavy rainfall, which had washed away most of the crucial evidence, including any DNA evidence typically found on a victim's body or clothes. Some police officers assumed she came from a warmer place as she had tan lines on her upper body, and tanning beds weren't as common in the 70s. But that was hardly enough to go on. During the forensic examination, it was found that the victim had no dental fillings or restorations. This meant that identifying her through dental records would likely not be possible. A promising lead surfaced when it was discovered that the young girl had recently eaten before she died. Her last meal included sweet corn, potatoes, and boiled canned ham. Authorities determined that she had her final meal at a diner in Lima. The waitress there even recognized her and mentioned that she served her on the evening of her murder, but pointed out that she was accompanied by an unknown man. The waitress recalled that the girl was wearing a men's windbreaker jacket with a red nylon lining. Authorities tried tracing the jacket's distribution, but were unable to do so, as this particular jacket was a promotional item, which made tracing it after distribution almost impossible. Another promising clue was the pair of metal keychains hanging from her front belt loops. These keychains were available in vending machines on the New York State Thruway, indicating that the victim may have traveled along that route before her death. However, since the keychains were quite common, they didn't help much in figuring out the girl's identity. By 1980, the investigation began to slow down. The county officials decided it was time to lay the unknown girl to rest. She was buried at Greenmount Cemetery in Dansville, New York. Fast forward to 2005, her remains were exhumed for further investigation. This was primarily due to advancements in forensic sciences. Her teeth were analyzed for mineral composition and linked to regional drinking water found in North America. Further analysis suggested she likely grew up in the southern or southwestern United States. By utilizing a technique known as forensics palynology, scientists further established that Callie Doe was either from Florida, Southern California, or Arizona. Forensic palynology is frequently employed in criminal and civil cases in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. It has also proven effective in Bosnia and Hungary in resolving post-war mass murders, but in the US, it had only been utilized a handful of times. In 2010, a portrait was created of the Callie Doe based on a facial reconstruction of her remains. Authorities shared the image on a public database, hoping that someone might recognize her and come forward. 4 years later, a woman named Laurel Norrell attempted to reach out to her former high school classmate, Tammy Jo Alexander, using social media. Laurel fondly remembered Tammy as a vibrant and joyful friend, always wearing a bright smile, but couldn't reach her. She did, however, manage to contact Pamela Dyson, Tammy's half-sister, who'd been residing in Panama City. Pamela didn't know much about Tammy either, since she was separated from her sister at 11 and sent to live with her grandmother. After reconnecting with her family, Pamela learned that no one had seen or heard from Tammy since the late 1970s. Tammy's former boyfriend informed Pamela that he last saw her sister in the spring of 1979. At that time, Tammy had hitched a ride from someone at a truck stop she used to work at. The truck stop was owned by her mother and stepfather, and the 15-year-old girl used to regularly ask truck drivers for rides. Pamela and Laurel grew concerned for Tammy, fearing something unfortunate had happened to her since she left home. Initially, Tammy's mother claimed that she reported her as missing, but due to her daughter's history of running away, the police didn't invest much effort in finding her. In August 2014, the two women visited the Hernando County Sheriff's Office and were shocked to find out that no missing persons report had ever been filed for Tammy in 1979. It took some convincing on the women's part, but eventually, a missing persons case was officially opened for Tammy. Shortly afterward, Carl Kopelman, the artist who created the facial reconstruction photo of the Callie Doe, came across Tammy's missing persons report. As soon as he laid eyes on Tammy's photo, the connection was instant. He had worked on her facial reconstruction 5 years ago. Kopelman then contacted the Livingston County Sheriff's Office and the regional administrator of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He told them about the potential match between the reconstructed photo he worked on and the new missing persons report of Tammy Alexander. It's worth noting that Carl was a moderator for sleuths.com, an online community where members collaborate to solve cold cases, usually those involving unidentified bodies. Web sleuths began posting details and looking into the similarities between the Callie Doe and Tammy Alexander. A DNA sample was obtained from Pamela Dyson and compared to DNA from the exhumed remains of the Aundria Jane Doe. Through DNA analysis, a positive match was confirmed. On January 25, 2015, the Aundria Jane Doe was officially identified as Tammy Alexander, more than 35 years after her death. WebSleuths.com played a pivotal role in reaching this conclusion, sharing information on Tammy and the Callie Doe's case, gathering possible leads, and connecting the dots. At last, after more than 3 decades, Tammy's family was able to figure out what had happened to the young teen. Pamela Dyson expressed her belief that her younger sister suffered from the abuse at the hands of her mother, which might have been why she ran away. Thanks to the hard work and dedication of police detectives, her childhood friend, and the persistence of internet sleuths like Carl Kopelman, Tammy Jo Alexander was finally identified, but her killer remains at large to this day. Detectives have looked at a number of potential suspects over the years. Most notably among them was serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, who even confessed to killing the Callie Doe, as well as several hundred others in the 80s. But in the end, multiple witnesses stepped forward, affirming that they were aware of Lucas's location at the time some of the murders took place. They claimed that it was physically impossible for Lucas to have reached the crime scenes in time to commit the killings. As a result, his statements were dismissed as unreliable. The FBI is offering a $20,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Tammy Jo Alexander's murderer. Susan Rainwater. It was the 9th of August in the year 2018. On a sunny Thursday in Eatonville, Washington, Susan Rainwater, a 63-year-old woman, had just finished her morning routine and set off on her bicycle around 9:30 a.m. With a loving goodbye to her husband, she promised to return in an hour. Little did she know that fate had a different plan for her. As Susan rode along State Route 7 on 320th Street East, just a stone's throw away from her home, a car, recklessly swerving out of its lane, collided with Susan, snuffing out her life in an instant. In a likely state of panic, the driver chose to flee the scene instead of sticking around. This all happened during the early hours of the morning, while Rainwater's husband just assumed she was simply enjoying her cycling session a bit too much. Several hours passed before a passerby, who turned out to be Rainwater's neighbor, noticed a severely damaged bicycle on the road and decided to investigate. Lying in the grass just a few feet away was Rainwater. The spark of life that had once gleamed in her eyes had faded away completely. Despite desperate pleas from Rainwater's family, the driver responsible for the collision refused to come forward. With scarce witnesses, the police had precious little to work with. Only a few clues were available, including a small black fragment from the front of the driver's car that had broken during impact. With no other recourse, a public plea for assistance in identifying the driver was issued. A Washington State Patrol officer shared photos of the crime scene and car part on Twitter, seeking information from the public. It's common for officials to post pictures of damaged parts and surveillance screenshots to gather leads, and often, this crowdsourced approach proved successful. But the fact remained, identifying the make and model of the car using just a small fragment would be quite a challenge, some would say impossible even. The next day, the photo was uploaded to Reddit, more specifically to a subreddit dedicated to figuring out the precise nature of obscure and mysterious objects. What happened next serves as a poignant reminder to never underestimate the internet. The subreddit gained significant attention within hours, with numerous Redditors attempting to identify the car model. Some saw it as a fun challenge, while others sought justice for the lady. A Redditor suggested that the piece of plastic might have come from the headlight bezel of a 1989 Chevrolet CK pickup truck. According to him, he used to work as a vehicle inspector in Maryland, and there used to be a mandatory headlamp adjustment on the checklist there for a long time. He quickly identified a unique notch at the access point for the headlamp adjustment screw-on in an older full-size pickup truck. He supported his claim with a simple image search that matched the exact make and model of the vehicle. The Redditor's name was Jeff, and he initially left the comment for fun without fully grasping the significance of the situation. But as his comment gained significant attention, Jeff realized the gravity of the matter. The information he provided proved to be the crucial breakthrough the troopers needed. Acting swiftly, the trooper who posted the original crime scene photos immediately tweeted that she had shared the details with the detectives, prompting the commencement of the investigation. In search of the car model in question, law enforcement combed through the entire city that day and asked the general public to relay any info that might lead to its whereabouts. The police also reviewed all the nearby surveillance footage available. Later on, they got the break they needed to crack the case. It was in the form of an anonymous tip. Someone informed the state police that the specific Chevy they were looking for belonged to a local guy named Jeremy Simon. Police went to Simon's house and found his car had front corner damage, likely from hitting Rainwater's bike. On August 14th, police arrested Simon. When announcing the arrest, Washington police thanked Reddit users and the anonymous tipster for their support in helping solve the case. Fellow Redditors praised Jeff, the vehicle inspector, and flooded his inbox with kind messages and congratulations. As for Simon, he was suspected of driving under the influence and knowingly leaving the scene of a crash he caused. He was detained on charges of vehicular homicide and illegal drug possession. According to Simon's legal defense, he had fallen asleep at the wheel and accidentally veered out of his lane, which caused him to unintentionally hit Rainwater's bike. Simon confessed to the police that he initially believed he hit a mailbox, but decided to flee when he noticed a crushed bicycle because he didn't want to glance at a dead body. He pleaded not guilty to charges of vehicular homicide, leaving the scene of a fatal accident, and possession of a controlled substance. Throughout the trial, Simon consistently expressed remorse and acknowledged the immense loss suffered by the Rainwater family. He was ultimately found guilty of vehicular homicide, hit and run, and drug possession, as he had heroin in his possession at the time of the accident. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison under a drug treatment program for addicts. This meant he would serve half the time in prison and half on probation, provided he fulfilled other conditions, such as participating in substance abuse treatment. Understandably, Rainwater's family was deeply outraged by the perceived leniency of the sentence, as 4.5 years seemed woefully inadequate for a murder, even one that was unintentional. Leah Miller, Rainwater's daughter, expressed to the court that a few years in prison did not feel like sufficient punishment. She emphasized her mother's profound love for her, stating, "You knew every single day what you meant to her." As for Simon, Miller told him, Do better, be better, live a better life. Defense attorney Michael Stewart stated that Simon had been actively trying to turn his life around, dedicating long hours to his carpentry job and pursuing treatment for substance abuse long before the accident. In the meantime, Rainwater's family could only mourn her loss. She didn't deserve to be left on the side of the road with no one to help her because all she ever did was help other people, said Leah Miller, her daughter. She deserved better. All she ever did was help others. In just 7 days, the internet and social media came together to bring justice to a case that could have otherwise been buried and forgotten. Susan Rainwater's remarkable tragic case serves as an undeniable proof of the internet's power, also showcasing that social media can be far more than just a platform for frivolous content. It can be a tool for justice. Haley Wilson. Haley Faith Wilson was a senior at Randall High School in Amarillo, Texas. Blue-eyed and with blonde hair, Haley loved playing the guitar and singing. On the night of December 25, 2011, the Wilsons had just had a perfect Christmas celebration together. They enjoyed the lovely snow, spent time with family and friends, and everything seemed to be perfect. Haley, in particular, was in good spirits. It was the first Christmas that she had worked and saved up enough money to buy gifts for everyone in the family, as she seemed very proud of that. "We had such a great Christmas together, and I didn't see this coming. We spent a lot of time with the kids, and I don't think we could have done anything differently," said her father, Ray Wilson. However, the following day, when Ray went outside to start his own car, he realized that Haley's car, a silver 2003 Ford Focus station wagon, was missing. After rushing into her room, he noticed that her bedding, acoustic guitar, and a few small items were gone. Her window was wide open, and there was a goodbye note scrawled in black marker on a yellow sticky note. The note stated that Haley felt there was nothing going on in her life. She wanted to embark on a journey where she could find purpose and pleaded with her dad not to look for her. "Don't look for me, Dad. I know you go to the end of the world for me, but you won't find me." Haley also left her cell phone behind, along with a map marking 3 locations: Humboldt, California, Arcata, California, and Bisbee, Arizona. At first, he was unaware of any connection between the 3 locations until he received a link listing them as hippie havens. Because Haley was 17 years old, in Texas, she was considered a legal adult, and her name was added to a national database of runaways. Ray and his wife Amber began the desperate search for their missing daughter. They knew that the chances of finding her would grow slimmer with each passing day. While going to the police and reporting her missing was the first step, neither Ray nor Amber were sure of what to do next. It goes without saying, when it comes to children, a parent would do everything in their power, and that includes turning to the internet for help. In his desire to leave no stone unturned, Ray posted to his Facebook page and Twitter account. On December 29th, he created a YouTube video that went viral. In the video, which was accompanied by a guitar music played by his own band, a visibly distraught Ray attempts to hold back tears as he silently lifts up white index cards recounting his daughter's story. He tells the viewers how much he loves his daughter and pleads with them to come forward with any information regarding her whereabouts, or at the very least, to pass the video along and pray for her. The video received over 620,000 views in just a few days. Dozens of encouraging and reassuring messages then flooded Ray's Twitter profile over the course of several days. Some pledged to inform their communities to keep an eye out for Haley, while others even claimed to have spotted her at a party in Oceanside, a 1,100-mile drive from Haley's hometown. But a few people accused the whole incident of being nothing more than a publicity stunt to draw attention to Ray's music band, Texas Heat. Nonetheless, Ray held on to the hope of reuniting with his daughter, whom he believed was heading to California. Then, On January 3, 2012, just a few days after Ray's video was posted, a Carlsbad police officer pulled over a blonde 17-year-old girl and detained her when he found out she had been reported as missing. The girl's name was Haley Wilson. On that same day, Ray Wilson posted a joyful tweet. Haley was found. They talked, and he was flying over to San Diego to meet her. According to Jody Sasway, the spokeswoman for Carlsbad Police, Haley was detained at 4:42 a.m. near the intersection of Caribou Court and Whiptail Loop, and the officer who pulled her over was just making a regular safety check. After a cheerful reunion, Ray and Haley returned to Texas, where an emotional homecoming was met with hugs and tears of joy. Aundria Bowman. Aundria Michelle Bowman was a teenage girl who lived in Hamilton, Michigan. Her original name was Alexis Miranda Badger. She was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, on June 23, 1974. Her birth mother, Kathy Turkanen, put her up for adoption when she was 9 months old. After spending months in foster care, she was adopted at 21 months old by Dennis Bowman and his wife Brenda, who renamed her Aundria. In 1988, Aundria's school staff grew worried when she told them that she was frightened to go home because her adoptive father had been abusing her. The police were called, and Aundria was subsequently questioned by the authorities. The social worker brought Aundria back to her house and had a discussion with Dennis and his wife regarding the accusations. They denied the allegations and attributed Aundria's behavior to a teenager acting out, as she had recently discovered she was adopted as an infant. The Bowmans then relocated to a rural trailer in Allegan County shortly after this incident. On March 11, 1989, 14-year-old Aundria vanished from her family's home. Her adoptive father tried calling the homes of kids Aundria knew to find out where she was, but none of her friends had seen her. Dennis told the cops that Aundria had stolen $100 from him before leaving. With no foul play having not been suspected yet, Aundria was then classified as an endangered runaway by the authorities, and her case was passed along to the Youth Services Bureau. Months later, Brenda, Aundria's adoptive mother, contacted the police numerous times to report sightings of her missing daughter that she had been informed of. However, the police were never able to substantiate any of these sightings. After Aundria went missing, the police briefly investigated the Bowman family. They were especially intrigued by Dennis Bowman's extensive criminal history. In 1980, Dennis allegedly tried luring a woman into a wooded area in western Michigan and assaulting her. The woman claimed that Bowman had threatened to shoot her if she didn't comply with his commands. In the end, Dennis was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison, but ended up serving the minimum sentence. It's worth noting that he was still on parole for the previous assault when Aundria disappeared. His antics didn't end there. He was arrested again in 1998 for breaking into his co-worker's home in Ottawa County, where he tried to steal several items, including women's lingerie. Despite their doubts about him, they were unable to arrest Dennis in regards to Aundria's case due to a lack of evidence. Then, in April 2010, a social worker sent a letter to Kathy Turkanen's home in Massachusetts. The letter stated that Kathy's biological daughter, Alexis, had disappeared from her Michigan home in 1989. The police were exploring a potential lead in the case that Alexis could possibly be a Jane Doe discovered in Wisconsin, nicknamed the Racine County Jane Doe. To confirm this assumption, they needed a DNA sample from Kathy. Although Kathy agreed to provide her DNA, she wished to learn more about what became of her daughter. She searched online for missing girls in Michigan and quickly found one in Holland whose physical description and birthday matched Alexis. Upon viewing the school photo of the missing girl, Aundria Bowman, Kathy believed that she could be her daughter. She then created a Facebook page dedicated to her daughter, as well as a classmates.com account under Aundria's name in the hopes that anyone, maybe some of Aundria's childhood friends, might know something and decide to reach out. Instead, she was contacted by another person interested in her daughter's case, forensic sketch artist and amateur internet sleuth Carl Kopelman. After exchanging lengthy messages and phone conversations, Kopelman introduced Kathy to other online investigators who shared an interest in Aundria's case. With their help, she was able to revamp the Find Aundria's Facebook page and make it more visible to a wider audience. With Kopelman by her side, she got in touch with Pat O'Reilly, a retired Michigan detective who was familiar with Aundria's case. O'Reilly immediately pointed to Dennis Bowman, Aundria's adoptive father, as the person they should be investigating. Based on what O'Reilly told them, the duo began digging into Dennis's past. They then learned the details of Dennis Bowman's criminal record after submitting a Freedom of Information Act request. When they found out what Dennis had done, Kathy felt a gut-wrenching hunch that he was the one responsible for Aundria's disappearance. If Kathy's suspicion was correct, it would indicate that the unidentified body found in Racine County was not Aundria. Meanwhile, everyone waited patiently for the results of Kathy's DNA test to determine whether there was a match with the Racine County Jane Doe. When the results finally came, Kathy didn't know whether to feel relieved or heartbroken. The Racine County Jane Doe was not her daughter. This meant that Aundria was either still alive or her body hadn't been found yet. As Kopelman meticulously planned the next steps of their investigation, Kathy became too enraged to stay quiet. In her mind, they had all the proof they needed. Referencing his past criminal record, she started making Facebook posts accusing Dennis Bowman of being responsible for Aundria's disappearance. But without solid proof, the police were still unable to make an arrest. The break in the case happened on November 2019, when Dennis Bowman was arrested by the Allegan County Sheriff's Office in connection with a murder that occurred 9 years prior to Aundria's disappearance. The victim's name was Kathleen Doyle, a 25-year-old aspiring author who'd taken up journaling until her untimely death. The crime scene indicated that Doyle had endured a brutal assault, one that ended in her death via asphyxiation. Authorities believed that the perpetrator was an unknown intruder, possibly a stranger. Their DNA was collected from the scene, but the technology at the time was limited and no suspect could be identified. Thankfully, as the years went by and science caught up with Doyle's case, police were able to produce a list of possible suspects using a technique known as genetic genealogy. Among the names mentioned in the list was none other than Dennis Bowman. But to prove it was Dennis, the cops needed a DNA sample from him to compare it with the one they collected so many years ago. As it turns out, the police didn't need to go looking for Dennis, as he'd already given them his DNA without even knowing. This was when he visited the police station to file a complaint against Kathy Turkanian, whom he complained was harassing him and making defamatory accusations against him online. Knowing Bowman's history and believing it might come in handy one day, a detective offered him a water bottle and kept it when he left, later using it to obtain a DNA sample. After running the sample against the evidence collected from the scene of Kathleen Doe's murder, the match was made. Dennis Bowman was the killer. Even though Bowman was now imprisoned, Kathy still felt like justice had not been served for her daughter yet. 3 months later, it finally came, the justice she had been seeking for so long. With nothing left to lose, Dennis decided to confess to Aundria's murder, hoping that his confession would prevent him from being imprisoned in Virginia, where he was facing charges for the Doyle murder. It took little time for the police to announce that they had discovered human skeletal remains which likely belonged to Aundria Bowman. They were found in Dennis Bowman's backyard, buried under a cement slab, and to confirm it was Aundria, Kathy's DNA was taken for comparison. In March 2020, almost 31 years after Aundria had disappeared, the results confirmed that Kathy was right all along. It was a match. Aundria Bowman's cause of death was ruled as homicide by unspecified means. Dennis claimed that Aundria's death was unintentional. He explained that he hit her during an argument, which caused her to trip and break her neck, and to conceal his crime, he reported her missing. When the Bowman family decided to move after Aundria was killed, Dennis also admitted to relocating his daughter's body to the newly purchased property and burying her beneath a concrete slab. In June 2020, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences and an additional 20 years for the murder of Kathleen Doyle. During his trial, Dennis's wife and Aundria's adoptive mother, Brenda Bowman, described Aundria as challenging, disobedient, and always struggling with completing homework. According to Brenda, she did not believe Aundria when she told her about what Dennis had done to her. She thought that her daughter's behavior was a result of finding out that she was adopted. On December 22, 2021, Bowman pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and was sentenced to anywhere between 35 to 50 years by an Allegan County Circuit Court in February 2022. The reason they solved it, the reason they're where they're at, is because Carl and I pushed it. It took me almost 10 years to get where I am at, Kathy said. She expressed her sorrow that she had to give up her daughter and that her daughter was gone, but was relieved that justice had been served. Barbara Ann Hackmann Taylor. In May 1968, a man called Wilbur Riddle was collecting glass telephone pole insulators while traveling on U.S. Route 25 in the Kentucky backwoods when he stumbled upon a green bundled-up tarp. Riddle used his foot to nudge it, which caused it to roll down an embankment. During its rapid descent, the tarp came undone and uncovered its wrapped contents. It looked like a human body. Panicked, Riddle ran to a nearby gas station and called the local sheriff's office to let him know about his discovery. Shortly after, the sheriff arrived and examined the tarp's contents more closely. Upon seeing what was beneath, he was filled with horror. The body of a young girl lay lifeless in the open air. Her short brown hair was matted and tangled. Her face was badly decomposed, and her white skin almost looked frozen solid. Yet even in death, it was clear that she was once an average teenager. The mysterious female body was dubbed the Tent Girl. With no missing persons report matching her description, the police issued a desperate plea for any information relating to her identity. Many leads were followed, but each one ended in disappointment. In 1971, she was buried at Georgetown Cemetery, and as the years turned into decades, it seems as though her story was destined to remain untold. In the late 1980s, Lori Riddle, the daughter of the man who found the body of the mysterious Tent Girl, began a romantic relationship with a man named Todd Matthews. During their relationship, Lori told Todd about her father's story. It immediately sparked Todd's curiosity, and he developed an interest in the unsolved mystery. But his passing interest grew into an obsession when he began frequently visiting Tent Girl's gravesite, inspecting missing persons reports from the time period, and combing through area newspapers for even the slightest clue that could guide him in the right direction. For 10 long years, Todd desperately tried to get to the bottom of the case. He used every available source and method he could think of, but unfortunately, nothing useful ever came to light. The fact that the internet didn't exist back then certainly didn't help matters. All he had were his phone calls and interviews, and they yielded only snippets of incomplete information. But with the dawn of the internet age, Todd found himself in a world where even the most obscure of missing persons reports and newspaper articles could be accessed from the comfort of one's own home. In 1998, Todd was browsing an online forum dedicated to unsolved cases, one night when he came across a post from an Arkansas woman named Rosemary Westbrook. Rosemary was desperately searching for any information regarding her missing older sister. According to the post, her sister's name was Barbara Ann Taylor, and she had been missing since 1967. The description Rosemary provided seemed to match the one etched on the tent girl's headstone. Barbara had brown hair and brown eyes, was approximately 5'2" in height, and was last spotted in the Lexington, Kentucky area. Todd made contact with Rosemary and helped get her in touch with Kentucky's forensic medical examiner. Together, they confirmed the description of her sister, including a distinctive gap between her two central incisors. On March 2, 1998, the body of tent girl was exhumed and transported to a laboratory in Frankfort, Kentucky for DNA testing. To conduct the test, a cheek swab was obtained from Rosemary and compared to genetic material found within the pulp of one of tent girl's teeth. On April 26, 1998, the results of the DNA test were finally ready. The sheriff's office confirmed the identity of the corpse found abandoned in a tent in the Kentucky woods so many years ago. The body of the mysterious tent girl actually belonged to 24-year-old Barbara Ann Hackmann Taylor. Barbara had relocated to Kentucky without her family's knowledge. She was employed at a restaurant and had a young daughter at the time of her disappearance. Her husband, George Earl Taylor, worked in a carnival and stated he had not seen her for several years and that she had left him for another man. Although Todd Matthews suspected that he had killed her, George was never officially implicated in Barbara's murder, as he had already died of cancer in October 1987, long before Barbara's body was found. By helping figure out the tent girl's identity, Todd Matthews felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment and purpose. He went on to co-found the Doe Network, a group that manages an online database where volunteers work together to match missing persons with unidentified descendants. Jason Patrick Callahan. On June 26, 1995, two men were driving down Greensville County, Virginia, when their car violently crashed into a pair of trees. Neither of them survived. Police officers noted that none of them were wearing a seatbelt, which likely contributed to their demise. The crash seemed to come out of nowhere. Neither of the descendants had any traces of drugs or alcohol in their systems, and there were no external causes that could explain why the crash happened. So authorities soon came to the conclusion that the driver must have fallen asleep behind the wheel. Michael Hager, age 21, was identified as one of the victims. The extent of the injury sustained, namely to the face and upper body, meant that confirming the identity of the second passenger would prove challenging. It certainly didn't help that he didn't have an ID, and the graphic nature of the accident meant that mortuary photographs couldn't be released to the public. A letter addressed to a man named Jason and containing a phone number was found inside one of his pockets. Unfortunately, the phone number provided in the letter did not have a proper area code and did not lead to any clues regarding the name of the second victim. Fingerprint analysis was then used to try and identify his body by trying to match it to national databases, but the attempt was unsuccessful. When interviewed, Michael Hager's family could not identify the unknown passenger either. Nonetheless, the unidentified body appeared to belong to a Caucasian male aged between 15 and 21, with brown eyes and long curly brown hair that had been dyed red. He wore a red tie-dyed Grateful Dead t-shirt along with Levi jeans, white socks, and black Fila running shoes. He had a star tattoo on his upper left arm and a faded tattoo on his right arm. A yellow Bic lighter, $1 in quarters, and most notably, 2 scalped concert tickets were also discovered alongside his body. The tickets were for 2 Grateful Dead concerts set to take place at the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium in Washington, D.C. They were dated June 24, 1995 and June 25, 1995, respectively. Investigators managed to trace the two tickets to a man living in Pennsylvania, but he turned out this man was a ticket reseller and could not remember who he sold them to. Ultimately, even after the police released an artistic reconstruction of the young man's face, his body remained unclaimed for 2 decades. He was later dubbed Grateful Doe, in a reference to the Grateful Dead tickets found in his pocket. In later years, internet detectives were intrigued by the mystery of the Grateful Doe and set up web pages dedicated to cracking his case. A Redditor named Layla Betts from Queensland, Australia, discovered the case of Grateful Doe and shared the story on Reddit. She subsequently established a dedicated subreddit, r/Grateful Doe, devoted to solving the case. The community saw thousands of people joining in, and Layla would sometimes spend up to 12 hours a day moderating the community, responding to comments, contacting law enforcement, and posting updates. One of the updates included computer-generated sketches of what the Grateful Doe might have looked like in life. Soon afterward, the case began garnering support from people on Facebook and Web Sleuths, a website committed to resolving mysteries. One day, Layla received a message from a man called Steve. Steve claimed that the person in the sketches resembled his former roommate from Illinois, named Jason Callahan. Jason was a friendly and vibrant young man who often traveled between Illinois and South Carolina and had many close friends thanks to his warm personality. He was kind-hearted and free-spirited, embracing what some would call a hippie lifestyle. His family hadn't seen him since June 1995, when he left to follow a Grateful Dead tour, but due to his past history of running away from home, his parents just assumed he was living on his own somewhere. The next step was to locate Jason Callahan's family. Ultimately, Shannon Mickelson, who was Jason's half-sister, caught wind of the story in 2014. "I honestly started shaking," Shannon said. "When I looked at that picture, it looked like my dad was looking back at me. He had the same face." Shannon suggested taking a DNA test, and together with Layla and many other online investigators involved in the Grateful Doe case, they patiently waited for the test results. 1 year later, after the initial test proved inconclusive, all doubt was removed, and the Grateful Doe's real name was confirmed as Jason Callahan. Just like that, a case that police had given up on 2 decades ago was finally solved purely by the power of internet sleuths. Jason was one of the many fans who followed the Grateful Dead from concert to concert in the mid-90s. Perhaps it was fate that he passed away in the same year the Dead stopped touring, following the death of Jerry Garcia, who had been integral to the group's success as lead guitarist and vocalist. His mother told investigators that, although she hadn't seen Jason since 1995, she didn't suspect something had gone wrong until much later, as her son had a history of running away often. According to her, she was unaware of his travel whereabouts and uncertain about where to report him missing. As for his half-sister, Mickelson expressed conflicting emotions of relief and sadness upon discovering what became of her beloved brother. She mentioned that she hadn't seen Jason since their father and his mother parted ways when they were kids. The Philadelphia hate crime. On September 11, 2014, a young gay couple was walking down a secluded alley in Philadelphia when suddenly they were surrounded by a large group of people. The group was described as being made up of 10 to 15 well-dressed white people in their early 20s. Members of the group yelled out hateful slurs before savagely assaulting the couple. The couple desperately tried to defend themselves, but were quickly overwhelmed by the group's numbers. The assault occurred at the intersection of 16th and Chancellor Streets. When the police approached, the group ran away, carrying a bag belonging to one of the victims, possibly as a souvenir. The 27 and 28-year-old victims were struck in the head and chest, resulting in multiple fractures and cuts to their faces. The beating they endured was so severe that one of them was in critical state after arriving at the hospital and had to get his jaw wired shut as a result. The police, unsure of how to identify the suspects, posted surveillance footage on Twitter of a group of men and women they believe matched the descriptions of the attackers and asked the public to help with the investigation by identifying the culprits. After the surveillance video was shared on Twitter, a photo of what some believed was the same group sitting together was posted online. The group photo was taken the same night the assault took place at a restaurant situated about 3 blocks from the scene of the crime. A Twitter user then tried cross-checking the photo using Facebook graph search. By doing so, they were able to identify almost all 15 people present in the photo who had checked in at the restaurant. The names were then sent to the Philadelphia Police Department. Shortly afterwards, 3 people turned themselves in and confessed to their involvement with the brutal assault on the innocent couple. The trio comprised Kevin Harrigan, age 26 from Southampton, Philip Williams, age 24 from Warminster, Pennsylvania, and Catherine Knott, age 24 from Southampton, Pennsylvania. Catherine happened to be the daughter of a police chief in suburban Philadelphia. All of them were charged with criminal conspiracy, aggravated assault, and recklessly endangering another person. Although prosecutors confirmed that the victim's sexual orientation was definitely the de facto motive behind the attack, no hate crime charges were filed, as Pennsylvania's hate crime statute did not cover sexual orientation. This spurred a nationwide outcry for changes to the state's hate crime laws to cover crimes deemed motivated by sexual orientation. Police officers conducted interviews with 7 members of the group and 4 other witnesses, which helped paint a clearer picture of the events that took place that night. Law enforcement officers concluded that the incident started when one of the group members accidentally collided with one of the victims. Foul language was exchanged, followed up by shoving, pushing, and punching. As for the bag that was stolen, according to investigators, a witness who was not part of the group found the bag after the assault and took it, thinking it belonged to one of the group's members. Later, the witness left the bag at a bus stop, where another person rifled through it and ended up using one of the victim's credit cards. In the end, Kevin Harrigan and Philip Williams were offered a plea deal, which they accepted. In exchange for avoiding prison time, they were ordered to pay approximately $1,000 as restitution, complete 200 hours of community service at a facility that catered to the LGBT community, and were prohibited from going to downtown Philadelphia for several years. But when offered the same terms her friends accepted, Catherine Knott chose to reject the plea deal and go to trial. Things didn't go exactly as she had planned, however, as she was deemed to have played a role in the beating of the homosexual couple and was sentenced to 5 to 10 months in prison. According to prosecutors, despite all they've been through, victims Zachary Hess and Andy Haught encouraged a resolution that promoted tolerance and understanding in favor of a strictly harsher punishment. In a statement, Philadelphia District Attorney Seth Williams expressed gratitude to the public for sharing information related to the case and helping bring some form of justice to the victims. Abraham Shakespeare. In the small town of Plant City, Florida, lies the shocking story of Abraham Shakespeare. Growing up amongst the vast orange groves and strawberry fields, Abraham's life was far from affluent. He often struggled to make ends meet and worked in the agricultural fields to help support his family. Abraham wasn't a really fortunate person, according to Greg Smith, Abraham's friend. Abraham was illiterate. He had left school at an early age and worked hard to put food on the table. But on the 15th of November 2006, Abraham and his co-worker, Michael Ford, were headed to Miami when they decided to make a fateful stop at a tiny convenience store in Frostproof, Florida. Ford had gone in to purchase some cigarettes and drinks for the both of them. Abraham handed him $2 out of the $5 he had on him, asking Ford to buy him 2 lottery tickets instead. This turned out to be both the best and worst decision Abraham ever made, depending on how you look at it. When the numbers were read, Abraham was shocked to discover that he had just won $30 million. Abraham agreed to a settlement of $16.9 million and displayed his kind-hearted nature by using a portion of the money to buy homes for his cousins and assisting his friend, Greg Smith, who was a local barber, in paying off a business loan worth $87,000. Abraham also bought a small mansion for himself in North Lakeland. In addition to his luxurious home, the only things he spent money on were a Rolex watch and a Nissan Altima. Sadly, when your origins are humble and you suddenly become rich, you might become a source of envy to some. This was exactly the case for Abraham, as his newfound wealth brought about a litigious dispute with his close friend, Michael Ford. Ford claimed that Shakespeare had stolen lottery tickets from his wallet and demanded an exorbitant $1 million settlement, which Shakespeare refused to pay. Frustrated, Ford decided to pursue legal action against Shakespeare in the civil courts. But Ford's lawsuit did not go exactly as he had planned, as he had failed to convince the jury of his version of events. At first glance, it appeared as though hitting the jackpot was the best thing that could ever happen to a hard-working, good-natured man such as Abraham. But in truth, this was far from the case. Abraham lacked the financial knowledge necessary to manage his money properly. He couldn't even read letters and often signed contracts without understanding what was on them. To make matters worse, Abraham had an entourage of people around him, most of whom he didn't even know, who used him as their personal cash cow, capitalizing on his kind spirit and generosity. Before long, Abraham, who had become outrageously wealthy, at least for an everyday working man, had lost most of his money in less than 2 years, only having $2 million left to his name. He thought his luck was seemingly about to change, however, when he met Doris Dee Moore. Introduced by a mutual friend, Moore suggested writing a book about Abraham's life, but as they discussed the project, she learned that he was rapidly going broke. Moore saw an opportunity, convincing Abraham to entrust his financial affairs to her and to isolate himself away from family and friends who were only after his money in the large home he had bought. As the weeks went by, Abraham's loved ones grew more concerned. Not only had they not seen him in a really long time, but he wasn't answering his phone either. Moore, who was the only person who had been in contact with him, reassured Abraham's family that he had gone away for some time. She also claimed that Abraham had been sending her text messages saying he was okay. Initially, Abraham's family did find this statement somewhat believable. According to Cedric Edom, Abraham's cousin, Abraham did mention wanting to go away for a while. So, while worried about him, Abraham's family clung to the hope that he would return home eventually. But after not hearing from him for 7 months, his family knew something wasn't quite right, and a missing persons report was filed. Many of his family members and associates were questioned. His mother informed police officers that Abraham had sent her multiple text messages before he went missing, which seemed a little strange since, as far as she knew, her son didn't know how to write. Investigators briefly turned their attention to Michael Ford, the spiteful co-worker who voiced his claim to Abraham's lottery winnings. Did he have anything to do with Abraham's disappearance? Seeing as how angry and humiliated he might have felt after losing the lawsuit, the motive was certainly there. But it was soon discovered that Ford could not have been involved, as he was in Georgia at the time of Abraham's disappearance. Authorities then combed through the lengthy list of individuals who had outstanding debts to Abraham, hoping to uncover any potential suspects. Multiple people stood out, but there was one major problem. There wasn't any tangible evidence or clues that suggested foul play as the cause of his disappearance, and it seemed as though the mystery would remain unsolved. at least until something else was uncovered. In the meantime, an online forum called Web Sleuths took great interest in Shakespeare's case. Abraham had a little kid and was very close to his mother. He just didn't seem like the type of guy to abandon his family. And so, between 10 and 20 amateur sleuths began posting clues online about the case that seasoned detectives might have missed. Many of them pointed to Moore as the primary suspect, the reason being that she was the last known person who was still in touch with Abraham before he vanished. She had also filed for bankruptcy in 2002, yet her company, American Medical Professionals, had not only acquired Abraham's $1 million home under dubious circumstances, but Moore herself had begun posting pictures inside the home, reveling in the glamour. Not only that, but she also bought a $70,000 2008 Chevrolet Corvette for her boyfriend and a $90,000 2009 Hummer for herself about a month before Abraham was last seen. Soon after Web Sleuths began digging, Moore attempted to create an account on a website using an alias in order to defend her innocence. The independent sleuths in the group then tracked down the IP address of this suspicious account, providing proof of Moore's potential involvement, which was then forwarded to law enforcement. Moore was subsequently interrogated. During her interrogation, she seemed cooperative and readily shared texts from Abraham, indicating he left of his own free will. Detectives also questioned her about how Abraham's home came into her possession. Moore told them she paid Shakespeare in cash for it, but did not elaborate further. On December 27, 2009, Abraham's mother was eating at a restaurant with Dee Dee when she received an unexpected phone call from an unknown caller. The voice on the other end identified himself as Abraham, but Abraham's mother was far from convinced. She reported the incident to local law enforcement, who successfully traced the call. Turns out, the person behind the call was none other than Greg Smith, the barber who received an $87,000 loan from Abraham. The phone signal was tracked to a bustling shopping center parking lot. There, undercover detectives waited for Smith to show up. But as they waited, they were stunned to witness an all-too-familiar face pull in. It was none other than Dee Dee Moore. She parked her car next to Smith's, got into his car, and handed him a large sum of cash. After Moore left, the officers confronted Smith. He confessed that she had offered him $5,000 to call Abraham's mother and pose as Abraham, but he had no knowledge that Abraham was missing. Smith was eventually let go. But why would Moore go through all the effort of staging a fraudulent phone call? Red flags began to pop up when detectives dug into her background. Moore was a notorious pathological liar. She had previously been accused of arson and theft. She was also arrested for insurance fraud after lying about being attacked by two men, claiming they had tried to assault her and steal her car. But before they could confront her, they needed to gather more evidence. Smith was brought back and asked to wear a wire at his next meeting with Moore. He met up with Moore at a gas station, where she informed him that she was being accused of Abraham's disappearance. It is then that she makes a fatal error. She tells Smith that she's willing to pay someone to take the fall in her place. Due to the incriminating nature of this statement, investigators managed to obtain a subpoena for her phone records, revealing that the only calls and texts made from Abraham's phone after his disappearance were to Moore. Furthermore, Moore's and Abraham's cell phones were found to have pinged from the same cellular towers. Under the police's supervision, Smith was instructed to contact Moore one more time with a solution to her problem. He arranged another meeting with Moore and brought along a man he introduced as his cousin. This cousin of his was actually an undercover police officer. In this meeting, she confesses her belief that Abraham is dead and that she believes someone murdered him. Then, the undercover cop tells Moore he'd be willing to go to prison on her behalf, on the condition that she pays him $50,000 and provides the location of Abraham's body, claiming the story needs to sound as credible as possible to detectives. Ecstatic, Moore agrees. Later that evening, Moore asks Smith to meet her at a gas station alone. She then drives him from Lakeland to a house she bought in Plant City. Moore shows Smith a large cement slab in her backyard and says, "Tell your boy to dig 6 feet down and you'll find Abraham's body." She even gave him the murder weapon, a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, claiming it had been left behind by the person who killed Abraham. On January 25, 2010, authorities unearthed the remains of Abraham Shakespeare. They were exactly where Dee Dee said they would be. Dee Dee Moore was, once again, brought in for further interrogation. In her first interview, she informed investigators that she assisted Shakespeare in leaving town as he was tired of being asked for money, telling them he probably went to Orlando, Jamaica, Texas, Puerto Rico, or Florida. She also stated that he might be sick in a hospital. But now, her story shifted, stating that Abraham was killed by drug dealers. Although she provided a name to detectives, it turned out to be a dead end. However, detectives still had no evidence that she was the shooter. They needed a confession. In their investigation, they visited her ex-husband and discovered that, on the night of Abraham's murder, Moore had paid him to dig a hole in her backyard and then backfill the hole after the sun had set. Law enforcement officials concluded that the ex-husband, who had never met Abraham before, was not connected to his killing and probably didn't know what the hole's purpose was. As her story came apart, the pressure was too much for her to bear. Moore eventually cracked, admitting to killing Abraham, but she proclaimed that it was in self-defense. Unluckily for her, prosecutors had grown weary of her ever-changing stories. Her guilt was obvious, and she was charged with murder. During the trial, it was revealed that Moore had used up nearly all of Abraham's money on Rolex watches, diamond rings, real estate, cars, and vacations. Moore apparently also tried bribing the mother of one of Shakespeare's sons with a $200,000 home as she agreed to tell detectives she'd seen him lately. Moore pleaded not guilty on March 15, 2010. She was convicted of first-degree murder by a jury in 2012 and was subsequently sentenced by a judge to life in prison without any chance of parole. She remains in prison at the Lowell Correctional Facility in Ocala, Florida. Jun Lin. Jun Lin was an international student from Wuhan living in Canada. Online, he'd post pictures of his cat and talk about feeling lonely. He had his whole future ahead of him and was the pride of his family. Jun worked part-time at a convenience store in Point St. Charles while studying as an undergraduate of engineering and computer science at Concordia University. Lin had been living in Montreal since July 2011 and moved into an apartment with a roommate in the Griffintown area on May 1st. On May 24th, 2012, Jun mysteriously went missing. The following day, when he didn't show up for his work shift, his boss became suspicious. On May 27th, 3 of his friends went to his apartment to check up on him. He wasn't there. The police were informed of his disappearance on May 29th. On May 25th, 2012, a video titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick" was uploaded to the internet. The video was 10 minutes long and depicted a man being killed in a disturbing fashion. The video featured the 1987 song "True Faith" by New Order playing in the background, and a poster of the 1942 film Casablanca is also within view. An attorney from Montana tried to report the video to Toronto police and the FBI shortly after it was posted, but his pleas were dismissed by officials. The video was later reviewed by experts, confirming its authenticity and identifying the victim as a young Asian male. Days after the video was published, packages were sent to the headquarters of both the Liberal and Conservative parties of Canada, as well as 2 schools in Vancouver. All the packages contained the remains of a human. The one sent to the Conservative Party's headquarters contained an ominous note. The note informed about all the packages, and the murderer had plans to kill again. The other 3 packages also contained notes, but the police did not reveal what was written in them due to concerns about inciting copycats. Some remains were also found in the Snowdon area of Montreal, behind an apartment building, and it was later confirmed that all belonged to Jun Lin. After searching the area, officers found sharp and blunt objects believed to have been used in the murder, along with bloody clothing. The surveillance footage inside the building revealed a suspect carrying multiple garbage bags and discarding them outside. Police then searched apartment 208 after analyzing camera footage and discovering that it was likely the suspect's hideout. The apartment had already been largely emptied before his departure, but the police found blood on various items such as the table, mattress, refrigerator, and bathtub. The apartment was rented by a man called Eric Clinton Kirk Newman, also known as Luca Roca Magnota. Luca had a troubled past, one that was riddled with failure and disappointment. This, coupled with his narcissism and ego, left him feeling bitter and entitled. He began starring in low-budget adult films featuring homosexual content in 2003 and also worked as an escort on some occasions, but his career never took off. He then tried competing in Out TV's reality series Cover Guy, but was also unsuccessful. In 2005, he committed fraud by impersonating a woman and using a false identity to apply for a credit card. He then used the credit card to buy items worth more than $10,000. He was found guilty of 1 count of impersonation and 3 counts of fraud and pleaded guilty, receiving a 9-month conditional sentence and 12 months of probation as punishment. Then, in March 2007, he declared bankruptcy after incurring more than $17,000 in debt. Around the same time, someone began spreading rumors that Luca was dating notorious Canadian serial killer Karla Homolka. Luca vehemently denied these allegations. Over the course of several years, multiple social media and discussion forums were created, all of which either sang Luca's praises or spread false or unproven claims about him. But it later turned out that the person behind these rumors was Luca himself. In fact, Luca had created over 20 websites and 70 social media pages using various aliases. His reasons for doing so were straightforward. Luca craved attention intensely and would take extreme measures to ensure he remained in the public eye. It didn't matter if the attention he got was fueled by hate, just as long as it put him in the spotlight. This compulsion was exactly what motivated him to seek out a career in the film and modeling industries, and, sadly, what eventually drove him to commit some of the most atrocious acts a human being is capable of. In December of 2010, a video on YouTube was posted titled, "One Boy, Two Kittens." The video shows a figure killing 2 cats. Over the course of a year, more videos like the last one continued popping up. The videos caused widespread outrage around the world, leading people online to create investigative forums and social media pages in an effort to identify the person behind them. To find the cat killer's location, they searched for any clues they could find in the videos, going as far as examining the doorknobs, the wall sockets in the background, and even tracking down the distributor of a bed comforter visible in the footage. In the end, their efforts paid off, and they determined that the cat killer was located in Canada, later identifying him as none other than Luca Magnotta. By using Google Maps Street View and GPS data embedded in a photo, they were even able to figure out precisely where Luca lived. Web sleuths alerted Canadian police, warning them that Luca might graduate to humans, as animal cruelty is a known early indicator of psychopathic behavior and is often how serial killers develop their skills. They hoped the evidence they presented would at least be enough for a probable cause warrant. Sadly, their pleas fell on deaf ears. In 2011, Alex West, a Sun reporter in the UK, tweeted to Luca asking if he would be willing to participate in an interview. Luca took this opportunity to refute the accusations that he was responsible for the kitten videos, although the way he carried himself during the interview left the interviewer feeling visibly disturbed and on edge. He was, without a doubt, one of the most disturbed and disturbing individuals I have ever encountered, said Alex. Then, on December 12th, the Sun received an email from someone calling himself John Kilbride. It stated that they had to go into hiding for a while, but the next time the world hears from them, it will be in a movie they were working on starring not cats, but humans. The letter ended with the ominous statement, "Once you kill and taste blood, it's impossible to stop." Fast forward to around the time the Jun Lin video was posted. Web sleuths looking into the kitten killer spotted something odd. Luca had been hyping the video before it was even shot. Months before the murder, various headlines and videos had already been posted by Luca's numerous alternate accounts, labeling Luca as a deranged serial killer. After his apartment was raided, it was thanks to the hard work of the internet, which gathered all the evidence and put it together, that it became clear that Luca's motive for killing Jun Lin was nothing more than a calculated move to gain notoriety. Among the evidence was a photo of a Casablanca movie poster hanging above the bed where Jun Lin was killed. Web sleuths took note of a map that was shown in the classic film, outlining a plan to fly to Paris. Police were informed and later discovered that Luca had indeed fled to Paris. The location of his cell phone signal was traced to a hotel in Bagnolet, but unfortunately, they couldn't get to him in time. He had already left for Berlin. The internet ended up being the prime instigator of Magnotta's downfall. His narcissism and obsession with being the center of attention drove him to visit an internet cafe where he couldn't resist Googling news stories about himself. Luckily, someone at the cafe recognized him and informed authorities. Luca was arrested the very same day. He was extradited back to Canada, found guilty of first-degree murder, and will thankfully spend the rest of his life behind bars. Crystal Theobald. 24-year-old Crystal Theobald was a vibrant young woman living with her family in Riverside, California. Crystal had 2 children from a past relationship and ended things with her previous partner due to his drug addiction. She then moved into a relationship with 20-year-old Juan Patlin. According to Belinda Lane, Crystal's mother, Crystal was her pride and joy and cherished exploring heights, roller coasters, and going on adventures. Crystal was in a stable relationship and had her whole life ahead of her, but sadly, fate had other plans. On February 24th, 2006, Crystal was in a car with her boyfriend and brother, Justin Theobald. Her boyfriend was driving while her mother was in a car ahead of them. They were driving in a gang territory belonging to a notorious gang called the 5150, which is police code for Crazy One on the Loose. Gang members often use the term to refer to a person who's ready to put his life on the line. The 5150 were involved in a brutal turf war with other rival gangs at the time, namely a gang called the MD. The MD gang had attempted a hit on some members of the 5150, and the 5150 were looking to retaliate. Crystal's other brother, Robert Theobald, was driving ahead of Crystal and Belinda in a car resembling the one used by MD members. When the 5150 noticed his car, they began tailing him. The 5150 eventually lost sight of that car just as the two cars carrying Belinda and Crystal approached from behind. The one that Crystal was in bore a particularly striking resemblance to the one the 5150 had been tailing. They assumed that these were MD members circling back with the intent of attacking them. At 8:40 p.m., the Theobalds came to a stop at an intersection close to their family home when they noticed a white Ford Expedition parked next to them. A man carrying a firearm exited the car and started unloading at them. Crystal was sitting in the front seat and was shot in the head point blank, and her boyfriend was shot in the midsection. Crystal was rushed to Riverside Community Hospital. Her boyfriend luckily went through surgery and survived, but Crystal tragically passed away 2 days later. The Theobalds were devastated, none more so than Crystal's mother, Belinda. Belinda's sorrow soon turned into fury, and she vowed to get justice for her daughter, as she did not feel like police officers were doing a good enough job in tracking the killers down. So, Belinda began the long process of trying to track down the murderers herself. After being tipped off that the 5150 gang may be involved in Crystal's death, Belinda and Jamie McIntyre, Crystal's cousin, created a fake MySpace account to gather information. Jamie also created a second account using Crystal's photo, naming it Angel, which Belinda eventually took over. Angel soon established a good relationship with William Jokes Sotelo, a member of the 5150 gang, who just so happened to own a white Ford Expedition. Belinda's plan was to invite Sotelo and other 5150 members to an end-of-the-world party on June 6, 2006, 060606, with the intention of murdering them all herself. The day before the party, however, Belinda messaged Sotelo, revealing her intentions, and asked him, "Why did you kill me?" Sotelo disappeared after this message exchange, prompting Lane to hand over her MySpace information to the police. As they were tracking Sotelo down, the police spoke with Sotelo's brothers, William and Manuel, who were present in the Ford Expedition during the shooting. William didn't give any meaningful info. Manuel, on the other hand, ultimately agreed to cooperate. According to Manuel, he and his brother heard that members from the MD had tried shooting one of their own. While on the hunt for revenge, Sotelo identified the SUV driven by Crystal's brother, Robert, as belonging to the rival gang. After losing Robert, they encountered two vehicles at an intersection, one belonging to Belinda and the other to Crystal's boyfriend. It was then that fellow gang member, Julio Herdia, presuming the cars were there for an ambush, stepped out of the vehicle and opened fire on the cars, snatching Crystal's life in the process. In 2007, 1 year after Crystal's death, Julio Herdia was apprehended by the police. Herdia was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. He would have possibly received the death penalty had it not been for Belinda's request to spare his life, as, according to her, is not what Crystal would have wanted. It was much more difficult to locate William Sotelo, but in 2016, he was found to be living in Mexico with his wife and 4 children. Prior to going to trial, he confessed to 1 count of voluntary manslaughter. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to drop the charges relating to murder, attempted murder, and shooting at an occupied vehicle. Sotelo was eventually given a 22-year sentence. While Crystal's death serves as a tragic reminder of the power of gang violence, her story also shows the strength and determination of Belinda Theobald, who refused to let her daughter's killers go unpunished. Gregory May. Gregory May was a 55-year-old resident of Bellevue, Iowa. He had a passion for collecting Civil War memorabilia and Indian artifacts and was a skilled tattoo artist. He was divorced with a loving son and daughter. Despite their divorce, Gregory maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife, Sheila. He regularly stayed in touch with her via phone calls and holiday visits. The last time Sheila saw Gregory was during Christmas of 1999, when he disclosed his intention of relocating to Bellevue. In January of 2001, Gregory rented his basement to Douglas DeBune and his girlfriend, Julie Miller. Douglas was his best friend for 30 years. In that same month, Gregory's son, Don May, started to feel worried when he couldn't reach his father, despite making many phone calls over the course of several weeks. Normally, Gregory would speak to his son regularly. Don tried contacting his father's friends, but none of them knew where he was either. Gregory had also not contacted his daughter or ex-wife in a while, which was highly unusual. After 3 weeks of searching, Don went to the Bellevue Police Department in Bellevue, Iowa, to file a missing persons report. According to a police investigation, it was discovered that Gregory May was last seen with Douglas DeBune and his girlfriend, Julie Miller. The couple was later observed loading May's collection of Civil War memorabilia into a used Ford F-750 Ryder truck. Jan Bowman, who had been in a relationship with Gregory since July 2000, was interviewed by the investigators. On the night Gregory went missing, Jan had arranged to meet him at his home at 8 p.m. She went to the back door, rang the doorbell, and attempted to open the door, but received no response. She looked through the window and saw Greg May's lower half sitting still on a kitchen chair. Julie Miller was wiping something off the floor. After Jan's call went unanswered, she went to see George Vollrath, who was the property manager. Jan asked George if he could let her into the house to check up on Greg, but he refused, as she was not a resident there. On the Sunday after her initial call, she called again and was surprised to hear Julie Miller answer the phone. Julie informed her that Greg had traveled to Chicago. Then, 3 days later, Jan went back to Greg's place, only to discover that the house was now empty with no furniture. Greg's prized Civil War memorabilia was also missing. She never saw Greg ever again after that. On March 1st, 2001, Greg's 1996 red Chevrolet Blazer was discovered at an impound lot in Aurora, Illinois. As the investigation progressed, some items from Greg's collection began showing up at the Rock Island Auction Company in Moline, Iowa. Police then contacted the owner of the auction house regarding the stolen items and later confiscated them. The person who put the items up for auction identified herself as Mary Clark and claimed the items belonged to her uncle. However, when the auction house attempted to reach out to this Mary Clark, they always got a woman named Julie Johnson, who stated that she was handling the auction on behalf of her mother. In truth, Julie Johnson was actually Julie Miller, and Mary Clark was Julie's mother. In April 2001, Douglas and Julie were arrested in Flagstaff, Arizona. Douglas was still in possession of the Ryder truck at the time of the arrest. Investigators found a weigh station ticket in the vehicle, which indicated that they were near Kearney, Missouri. According to Douglas DeBuren, as far as he knew, Greg May had gone away to Illinois. However, Julie Miller had an entirely different story to tell to investigators. She revealed that Greg May was dead and that DeBuren was responsible for his death. Miller maintained that Greg's death was unintentional, a tragic accident stemming from a physical altercation. Nevertheless, investigators concluded that this incident was not the result of a simple misunderstanding, but a deliberate act of murder. Greg's family was informed by detectives that Greg was likely not going to return home. So now the question is, what was Doug DeBruin's motive for killing Greg May? Detectives theorized It was because of May's valuable antique collection, worth around $250,000. But proving Doug DeBruin's guilt in the murder was going to be challenging, as the evidence was scarce. While police did discover a small amount of May's blood on DeBruin's jacket, the remainder of the evidence supporting the case was circumstantial. All they knew for certain was that DeBruin had been caught selling Greg's collection, and that Greg's car had been found abandoned in Aurora, Illinois. Without a body, the prosecution couldn't even prove Gregory May was dead, which meant that Douglas had a solid chance of being acquitted. But 7 months after Greg's disappearance, on August 27, 2001, some remains encased in hardened concrete were discovered in Kearney, Missouri, hundreds of miles away from Bellevue. After notifying the police, an autopsy was conducted. The medical examiner was optimistic that the victim's face would have left an impression on the concrete. But later it was discovered that a hat had been covering the head before the concrete was poured, which meant that the face left no identifiable impression on the concrete. This made facial reconstruction a highly challenging task. All that could be determined for certain was that the remains belonged to a man between the ages of 40 and 60 who had undergone extensive dental work. Luckily, detectives called upon the talents of Philadelphia forensic artist Greg Bender, known for sculpting faces from the skulls of the unknown and having worked with law enforcement on over 40 cases. A bust was created, but the person to whom it belonged remained a mystery. The bust was added to the Doe Network website, which is run by a group of volunteers who aim to assist law enforcement in identifying John and Jane Does. That was when seasoned crime sleuth Ellen Leach took an interest in the man's case and decided to take a closer look at the bust. After conducting extensive research, Leach was able to match the sculpture to one of Greg May's missing persons photos. Greg's identity was confirmed after the dental records matched. The sculpture provided more than relief to Greg's family. It helped prove that Greg May was, without a shadow of a doubt, murdered. With Greg's skull now identified, the prosecution now had the final piece of the puzzle needed to take Douglas DeBruin to trial. As if Doug's situation wasn't hopeless enough by that point, his now ex-girlfriend, Julie Miller, was offered full immunity if she agreed to testify against him. According to Julie's confession, DeBruin strangled May. DeBruin was convicted of first-degree murder and first-degree theft. He was sentenced to life in prison. As for Miller, she was given a 3-year sentence for the crime of transporting stolen property across state lines. While Greg's death was an ugly and tragic loss, hopefully, his family could find some solace in the fact that justice had found its way to his killer's doorstep. Lavender Doe. On the 29th of October 2006, 2 men going for a jog in the woods near an oil field stumbled upon the body of a white female, probably aged between 17 to 25. The body was found beside a pile of burning bush. When investigators got to the scene, they were able to recover a purple sweater and a pair of jeans from her. She had $40 in her pocket. The time of her death was set between 8:15 p.m. and 10 p.m. the previous day. The victim weighed around 120 pounds. She was 5 feet 3 inches. Her hair was either strawberry blonde or light brown, might have had red highlights, but was definitely blonde, and it was determined that she must have come from a middle-class household. There was, however, one quality that the victim had that made her very peculiar. She had a perfect set of teeth with no cavities or fillings. She even had 2 of her baby teeth still intact. As her mystery became more popular, she would come to be known as the victim with the perfect set of teeth. Back to the crime scene, an empty gasoline can was recovered, and because of the nature of her death, it was ruled as a homicide. To make matters even worse, semen was found after a forensic examination was conducted. Residents of the area testified that there were many suspicious people in the area where her body was found, with some even referring to the location as a killing ground. Efforts were made to reconstruct her face, but because of the degree of burns, the process had to be attempted 3 times by a forensic artist. The police were befuddled by her case. All efforts to identify Lavender Doe proved fruitless because her dental records and DNA had no matches on the system. Also, there was no missing person notice by anyone that matched the Lavender Doe. For several years, this case remained a mystery to both the police and the general public. It wasn't until 2007 when a suspect in the case emerged. It was a man named Joseph Wayne Burnett, who was 36 at the time and was already a convicted sex offender. Already in prison for another crime, the police announced their suspicions that he was the murderer. Burnett vehemently denied his involvement in the rape and murder of the women, but the police still saw him as a suspect. However, they couldn't find a direct link between him and the crime. It would take another 8 years, in January 2014, for another interesting clue to emerge. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a digital composite image produced from a CT scan of her, all thanks to the advancement in technology since 2006. After the release of the reconstruction, the mother of missing 23-year-old Brandy Wells, her daughter, who had mysteriously disappeared after going out to a nightclub in Longview, Texas, in August 2006, contacted authorities because she felt the composite bore a striking resemblance to her missing daughter. However, after DNA testing, the possibilities of that were eliminated and the body remained unidentified. After some years of remaining unidentified, Lavender Doe's body was buried in Longview. The case had gone cold. It wasn't until 2018 that things started to dramatically get better for the Lavender Doe. In August of that same year, Burnett suddenly confessed to the killing of Lavender Doe, along with a fresh murder of Felicia Pearson. He would later go on to say that Lavender Doe, his victim, had tried selling him items from a magazine he refused. She would later ask to enter his car where they would have sex. Afterward, Burnett said she stole $40 from him, which pissed him off, and in retaliation, he murdered her. Also, a nonprofit organization called DNA Doe Project, run by civilians, took it upon themselves to try to uncover Lavender's identity and hopefully reconnect her with her family. They successfully raised $1,400 for a DNA profile analysis for genealogy research that would determine both her ethnicity and ancestry. It proved successful, and soon they were able to identify that Doe had Czech ancestry and also that she had a first cousin who lived in East Texas, 30 miles from where her body was originally found. After enough digging and research and persistence, the DNA Doe Project was finally able to identify Lavender Doe and announced that her identity would be released after Burnett's trial. It was found that her name was Donna Dodd. Her mother had left her when she was a baby and died in 2006, the same year that her daughter was also tragically murdered. Her father was homeless, and she had lived with her stepmother for a while before staying in Florida, where she lived with her half-siblings. In 2000, she would leave her family and join a door-to-door magazine sales team that would lure people in with the promise of adventure, but was actually a human trafficking organization that kept young people hooked on drugs. It was during this time that Burnett encountered Dana at a Walmart parking lot and where she met her premature death. The families of Dana Dodd decided to leave her body where it had originally been buried and replaced her gravestone with a new one that had her name and birth date. In December 2020, Burnett was sentenced to 50 years for the murder of both Dodd and Felicia Pearson. Paulette Jaster. In the year 1954, in the small city of Davison, Michigan, a pretty, lively, and lovable young girl named Paulette Jaster was born into a ranch-dwelling family. Her charming qualities endeared her to everyone who met her, and she was generally loved by those who knew her at the time. To the delight of her family and friends, Paulette would later leave Davison City in her late teens to study at Central Michigan University, but after just a semester in, Paulette dropped out. No one knew why at the time, and she refused to give anyone a reason for her actions. In the following years, things began to go from bad to worse to plain strange for her as she began to suffer from a serious mental condition. She also went through a terrible breakup with her high school sweetheart that made her condition even worse. She started making even more erratic decisions, like quitting her well-paying job at the Chevrolet plant in Flint, Michigan. And by the year 1974, when she was just 20, her friends and family began to suspect she begun taking marijuana. Her erratic behavior alienated her from friends and placed a wedge between her and her family. 3 years later, in 1974, Paulette will tell the Davison police that there were people that were trying to kill her, and in her words, use her mind. Eventually, the police petitioned the state, claiming that Paulette was too mentally ill to care for herself, and it was decided in a county probate court that she should be sent to a state hospital for evaluation and treatment. At that time in the 1970s, mental illness was seen as a character defect and not an actual illness that could be treated or managed. One moment, Paulette, age 23 at the time, was in the state hospital. The next, she had signed herself out of the hospital, staying there for less than 2 months. In 1978, she went home just before Christmas and got into a fight with her father before leaving Michigan for Florida, where her family had relatives. In April of that same year, Paulette would return for her mother's birthday. She would, however, leave 2 days after the birthday and would never be seen again. At the time of her disappearance, she was last seen walking towards Interstate 69 with an Army-style duffel bag in her hands. When her family did not hear from her after some time, they reported her missing. For almost a year, police couldn't find any leads until Social Security records showed that Paulette had earned $319 while working at a Walgreens lunch counter in Mesa, Arizona. After this, there would be no leads, and the case would eventually gather dust and grow cold for almost 3 years. In 1983, her mother received a tip that Paulette was now in Florida and was also in trouble. There were numerous sightings of her from different sources, but none of them were confirmed. It is at this point that things started to get bizarre. Paulette's sister began receiving strange calls from an anonymous caller who would ring in, not say anything, then drop the call. At the time, Paulette was convinced that it was her sister. But after a while, this would stop all of a sudden and cause the case to go cold again. Another 7 years went by, and in 1996, the Michigan State Police issued a new nationwide missing persons bulletin for any information regarding Paulette in a bid to revive the case and find a lead. Hope seemed to shine its soft light when a call came in, claiming that a Blue Earth, Minnesota Jane Doe could be Paulette. The body was taken for forensic testing, and it turned out not to be Paulette, putting a clog once again into the wheel of the case. Despite the police attempt to revive the case, nothing came forth. There were no leads, calls, or sightings. Everything just went quiet. But her family never stopped searching, and it didn't take long before another light at the end of a tunnel began to surface. The victim's siblings began searching missing persons websites. They stumbled on one called the Web Sleuths, which is a forum where registered users can discuss and classify information related to crimes, trials, and unsolved murders, which they would then try to solve. Eventually, the site would lead them to a woman called Debbie Saunders, whose alias on Web Sleuths was Houston Mom. With her help, they were able to identify a victim of a hit-and-run case from 1980 that bore strong similarities to Paulette. When she submitted her findings to forensic scientist Dr. Sharon M. Derrick, she also recognized these similarities, but found it difficult to run a test without fingerprints or DNA, causing her to resort to unorthodox methods for identification. Paulette's dental charts were cross-referenced with those of the hit-and-run victim, and an incomplete match was made because of the lack of x-rays. But interestingly, it was a match nonetheless. While scanning an autopsy report, Derek noticed 2 freckles on the woman's cheek, which when compared with the 1 freckle near Paulette's right eye, create a match that was strong enough for Paulette to be an absolute match. Paulette's body had finally been found almost 34 years after her disappearance. It was discovered that Paulette had hitched a ride from Arizona to Houston and was seen getting out of an 18-wheeler at a truck stop on Interstate 10 shortly before midnight on March 28, 1980. There was no ID on Paulette when an intoxicated driver swerved his car into Paulette, killing her in the process. There was one tiny detail that had slowed down investigators over the years. The duffel bag that witnesses had reported seeing on Paulette was abandoned in a trucker's cab and remained in his possession in the intervening years. This detail was abandoned and never followed through. The police never collected the bag from the trucker. If they had, all they needed for identification would have easily been found in the bag, and the family wouldn't have had to wait for almost 4 decades to find closure. The family also found that the young woman had been hit by Robert S. Couch, who was 23 at the time. He was arrested and charged for involuntary manslaughter and failure to stop and render aid. He pleaded guilty and was placed on probation for 5 years in July of 1980. They also found that their daughter had been buried in Houston under the name Jane Doe and a case number. Eventually, the family replaced this with a plaque that positively identified her as Paulette Jaster, finally bringing a close to a long and painful case. Strongsville Jane Doe. At a young age, Linda Murray Pagano's parents divorced. After a few years, her mother remarried a man named Brian Claflin, but that also didn't go well, and so she left him after a few months together. Linda had 2 siblings, a brother and a sister, named Mike and Cheryl Pagano, respectively. They had lived with Brian Claflin, but he was abusive towards them, so they had to move in to live with their mother's new boyfriend. According to Linda's siblings, Brian was abusive towards everyone except Linda, and since Linda wasn't so fond of her mother's new boyfriend, she decided to stay with Brian since they got along so well. On the 30th of August, Linda drove her Mustang with her boyfriend to Cleveland to attend a World Series concert at the old stadium. She didn't return home that night, and when she returned the next morning, she got into a fight with Brian, which caused him to kick her out of his house. After that event, strangely, Linda was never seen again. The day after, Brian called Linda's mother and told her that he was looking for Linda. After calling friends and family without results, the police were notified, and the police treated the case as that of a runaway. However, this did not stop the family from continuing their search for Linda. On the 5th of February 1975, 3 boys found skeletal remains along the bank of a rocky river in Strongsville, which is now known as Stream Run Reservation. No physical evidence was retrieved at the scene of the crime, and an autopsy would reveal that the skeleton was that of a white female in her late teens or early 20s. Further findings identified that the unknown woman had been shot in the head, a discovery that led to the case being classified as a homicide. When Linda's brother, Mike Pagano, heard of the report on TV, he wondered if the unknown woman could be his long-lost sister. Immediately, he called the police, and a woman answered the phone. When Mike explained the situation to her and gave her a description of his sister, the woman responded, "Oh no, this girl is a little older and maybe a little taller. Oh no, that's not your sister." This spelled the end of the case for many years. The police couldn't identify the skeleton with the hole in her skull, and the Pagano family could not find their sister. Decades later, the Strongsville Jane Doe, as she had come to be known, was finally buried at Potter's Field Memorial Gardens in Highland Hills. However, in 2015, a 22-year-old amateur sleuth and genealogy researcher named Christina Skates, while looking through the Highland Park Cemetery records for an ancestor of hers, stumbled upon a grave that had no name. It belonged to an unidentified white female, and this immediately piqued her interest. She kicked into high gear and began going through libraries before she found an old newspaper clipping about the murder of the Strongsville Jane Doe. She was relentless in her search for answers and called as many detectives as she could until they sent her a digital copy of the case files. Armed with the case files and a burning desire to find the truth, Christina Skates took to Reddit and submitted all of her findings under a subreddit called r/unresolved mysteries. She went by the alias Call Me Ice. The case went viral soon after and made its way to Web Sleuth and later involved a user who also worked as a forensic artist. His name was Carl Kopel, and he was quite respected by the forensic community for his ability to create realistic, accurate, and compelling digital recreations for victims. It so happened that the victim was not listed on any public database or any of the Doe networks. Skates decided to contact the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office about the case, and soon enough, the case was entered into a federal database for missing and unidentified persons. As soon as this was done, the police made a potential link, and on June 29, 2018, through DNA testing, a link was made to Mike and Cheryl Pagano, which confirmed that the remains belong to Linda Pagano. Efforts are now being made to determine who might have been Linda Pagano's killer. The last suspect would have been Brian Claflin, her stepfather, but he died in 1990. William Earl Moldt. At the age of 40, William Earl Moldt was a mortgage broker who led a very bland life that was based on a predictable routine. Part of that routine included him frequenting a bar in Lantana, Florida. William was not known to be a heavy drinker. In fact, he rarely drank, and whenever he was at the bar, he would brood, keeping to himself as he spent time on his own, alone. On the 7th of November, 1997, after spending some time at the bar, William got up to leave around 11 p.m. A witness would later say that he did not appear drunk before he left the club. William's girlfriend would report that he had called her around 9:30 p.m. to say he would arrive home soon enough. However, William would not make it home that night, nor was he seen ever again. When he did not arrive home, he was reported missing, and the police tried their best to search for him, but without clues or leads, it seemed like he had just vanished off the surface of the earth. Investigations proved impossible to pursue, and with time, the case grew cold. More than 20 years passed before a former resident of the Grand Isle housing development in Wellington, Florida, decided to take a look at their old neighborhood on Google Maps and noticed what looked like a car in a retention pond. The former resident phoned the current resident of the house, a man named Barry Fay, that there was a car submerged in the pond behind his house, along with screenshots that served as photo evidence. Fay got home, went to the pond to give it a check, but found nothing, so he called the neighbor. Interestingly, his neighbor had a drone and a camera, and by the time they recovered footage, it showed that there was indeed a car submerged in a retention pond. Fay immediately contacted the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office, and the vehicle was pulled out of the water. When it was retrieved, it was found to be heavily calcified, and skeletal remains were found within the vehicle. The vehicle, along with the bones, were taken to the county medical examiner's office for processing, and after a week, they were identified as belonging to William Earl Moldt. It so happened that the vehicle had been visible on Google Maps since 2007, approximately 10 years after his disappearance, but no one had noticed until 2019. Reports found that William, while returning from the club, might have lost control of his vehicle and crashed into the pond, which led to his death and subsequent disappearance. And even though the surrounding was under construction at the time, no one realized or noticed the vehicle throughout the construction process. After almost 22 years of pain, longing, and suffering, William's family was reunited with him. Even though dead, they got the closure that they deserved. The Golden State Killer. With 13 confirmed murders, over 200 burglaries, and 50 assault victims, the Golden State Killer, also known as the Visalia Ransacker and the original Night Stalker, was one of the most notorious serial criminals in American history. His reign of terror first began in the 1970s in the peaceful city of Visalia, California. Once a place where doors were left unlocked and the windows open, the city contained many poorly lit alleyways and narrow streets, making it a perfect hunting ground for a vicious psychopath. It all began with a few simple burglaries, which left police officers puzzled due to the manner in which they were committed and the nature of the items that were stolen. While most burglars tend to rush through their crimes, the culprit in question would take his time, often lingering for hours in the home he targeted. What's even more bizarre is that instead of stealing pricey items such as jewelry, electronics, and other valuables, he preferred to grab the seemingly insignificant, like cherished family photos and other personal items. In one case, however, he stole a handgun, which he later used to kill a man after attempting to kidnap his daughter. This burglar later became known as the Visalia Ransacker and carried out his crime spree there until 1975, when a tense encounter with a police detective nearly resulted in him getting caught. He nevertheless managed to narrowly escape by firing at the officer and fleeing the scene. But make no mistake, while Visalia may have been his starting point, his worst deeds were yet to come. In 1977, Sacramento, California became gripped by fear. A notorious criminal had been terrorizing the city for almost a year, growing bolder with each attack. At first, he targeted women living on their own or with their children, but later on, he began to target couples as well. He averaged 2 assaults per month. He was never caught, and it appeared he stopped operating in the Sacramento area, but the horror was far from over. Between 1979 and 1986, a series of meticulously planned and unimaginably cruel attacks rocked Southern California, snatching the lives of 4 couples and 2 women. The killer became known as the original Night Stalker. The original in his name was meant to distinguish him from Richard Ramirez, another notorious serial killer who was also referred to as the Night Stalker. The original Night Stalker would meticulously stalk his victims for days or even weeks before striking. Clad in a ski mask and wielding a gun, he would invade their homes, often staying for hours on end. The audacity with which he would pause to eat or drink during his horrific acts spoke volumes about how confident he grew to be. Just like the previous 2, he was also never caught. The untamed reign of the Visalia Ransacker and the original Night Stalker puzzled law enforcement for years, but the question is, how did they manage to elude capture throughout it all? According to people who worked on their case, it was mainly due to flawed communication, narrow-minded investigations, and outdated tech, not to mention that they all left very little evidence behind. For decades, the 3 seemingly unrelated cases remained a mystery, leaving many families without the closure they desperately sought. But in 2010, stay-at-home mom and writer Michelle McNamara made her mission to uncover the identities of the Visalia Ransacker and the original Night Stalker. Thanks to her efforts, DNA evidence was eventually able to link these 3 cases, revealing them to be the work of one person, a man she dubbed the Golden State Killer. By that point, McNamara's dedication to catching the Golden State Killer bordered on obsession. She'd spent weeks looking at composite sketches of his face, even narrowing down his blood type and shoe size. Every evening, she scoured the internet for fresh details on his crimes, hoping to discover a hidden clue that would unveil his true identity. She also started a blog dedicated to the case, which later became a platform where she'd share her discoveries with thousands of readers, as well as the police. McNamara wasn't the sole online detective chasing after the notorious Golden State Killer. Even before she began documenting his deeds, this elusive criminal had captivated the attention of amateur sleuths worldwide. Sadly, in 2016, McNamara passed away in her sleep. At the time, she was working on a book about her mission to uncover the identity of the Golden State Killer. Although McNamara wouldn't live to see the ruthless murderer behind bars, her profiling work would nonetheless lay the foundation for identifying him. She left behind 37 boxes of case files from an Orange County prosecutor, over 3,500 other files related to the case, and numerous other sources, notes, and potential leads, all of which would later prove invaluable in the effort to bring the infamous serial killer to justice. She also informed the authorities that the killer probably had ties to the military or law enforcement, which helped investigators narrow down the suspect pool substantially. In 2018, less than 2 years after McNamara's passing, her efforts would come to play a pivotal role in linking the Golden State Killer to crimes previously thought to be unrelated to him, which were committed across multiple California counties. According to the FBI, approximately 40% of murderers managed to evade capture. Among them, experts believe that a significant number are serial killers. The possibility that the Golden State Killer was among those who would never get caught was widely speculated. However, after more than 4 decades since his initial crime, an unexpected breakthrough finally emerged. 15 years after the last known crime linked to the Golden State Killer was committed, investigators were on the brink of giving up. They'd exhausted all known tactics and investigative methods. No fingerprints, no DNA match in police databases, and enlisting the general public's help with the promise of rewards yielded nothing. But then, a retired cold case investigator named Paul Holes decided to try something different: a genealogy website. Holes obtained a DNA sample from the location of a double murder in Ventura County in 1980, which was attributed to the Golden State Killer. This sample was then analyzed using GEDmatch, a publicly accessible genetic database. The search revealed information about the killer's ancestors, dating back several generations. Over the course of 4 months, investigators meticulously pieced together a family tree, ultimately leading them to the home of Joseph James D'Angelo, a 72-year-old grandfather who had recently retired from working at a grocery store warehouse. When interrogated, D'Angelo confessed to being a Navy veteran and a former cop, just as McNamara had predicted. On April 24, 2018, thanks to DNA evidence, California authorities accused D'Angelo of committing 8 first-degree murders. Then, in August 2018, he faced additional charges for 13 related cases of attempted kidnapping and abduction. Unfortunately, due to California's statute of limitations, some of the crimes he perpetrated in the 1970s couldn't be formally charged. On June 29, 2020, D'Angelo confessed to multiple counts of murder and kidnapping. In a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, he also owned up to several uncharged crimes. 2 months later, on August 21, 2020, he received a lifetime sentence with no chance of parole. Though Michelle McNamara couldn't witness the capture of the Golden State Killer, police investigators and internet sleuths alike credit her for playing a crucial role in bringing the killer to justice. She dedicated years to visiting crime scenes, interviewing victims, gathering research from various cities, and raising awareness about the case. Over the years, the internet has proven itself to be an effective tool in unraveling unsolved mysteries. The power of online communities has shown that, thanks to modern technology, anyone of use can help bring justice and closure to those who need it. Let us never underestimate the impact we can make when we come together. So, the next time you come across a missing persons case on your social media feed, remember that sharing it could potentially be the key to bringing someone back into their loved one's life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more intriguing mysteries. Thank you for watching.